We don't have Senator Mikulski and Senator Shelby around anymore to save NASA, right? They used to work together, and I'll say across administrations, NASA has not been properly funded, but this takes it to a new level.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Really looking forward to our next segment. We're going to be talking to a couple of folks from IFPTE about NASA. Lots of stuff happening there. Matt Biggs is the international president of the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers, IFPTE, and Faraz Khan is the legislative director of IFPTE. We're going to be talking to them about some of the proposed cuts to NASA, what their members do at NASA, and how their union is fighting back with other federal employee unions. Lots of stuff to talk about. I believe we have Matt and Faraz in the Zoom, right? Okay, Faraz Khan is in the Zoom, and Matt is going to be joining in just a moment. Faraz, welcome to the program. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me on, Jacob. Really appreciate the chance to talk about NASA and what our folks do there.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. You know, I think most listeners know that our show broadcasts from Huntsville, and so that's where the Marshall Space Flight Center is. And IFPTE has a local there. I think the local number is 27. They represent actual rocket scientists at NASA, and so every time that the Labor Council puts out a statement, I make sure to include somewhere in the statement that the Labor Council includes unions that represent workers from rocket scientists to grocery clerks and everything in between. I think it's a great, I think it's really cool having such a wide group of workers represented in the unions that make up our Labor Council. So I appreciate being able to have IFPTE involved here in Huntsville, and I know that IFPTE is doing a lot of work across the country, and so really excited to talk to y'all about NASA. I guess just to start off with, because it is such a, because it's such a something that people don't really think about as far as rocket scientists needing a union. That when people think about unions, they think about coal miners, they think about auto workers, they think about steel workers. And a lot of times they are surprised to hear that rocket scientists are unionized at NASA. So can you take a little bit of time to explain why such employees need and deserve unionization too?
Jacob, thanks for having us. Really appreciate it, and shedding light and transparency on this issue. Yeah, we're a union that represents, like you say, scientists, engineers, lawyers, judges. Every worker needs a union. Every worker, and it doesn't matter whether you're a rocket scientist or like I used to be, working a grocery store. You need every worker needs a union. This is particularly true in the federal sector, right? So we're NASA's biggest union, IFPT. We represent about 8,000 workers at NASA, civil servants, and federal unions are very important to bring transparency to the taxpaying public about what exactly is going on in these federal agencies. It's also critically important at a place like NASA, where 80% of NASA's budget is actually contracted out. So as a union, and for many years, Faraz does this work now on Capitol Hill, but for many, many years, we would take what we see happening in the agency and what we see happening with these contractors to Capitol Hill to provide proper oversight. So yeah, every worker needs a voice on the job. And that's also true of rocket scientists.
Absolutely. And the being able to kind of speak freely about things that are going on at work. People really don't think about that. But, people think about, when they think about unions, they think about, higher wages. Maybe they think about better working conditions. But the ability to speak freely to your boss is something that it really does go underappreciated, I think, because, folks are rightly scared of their employer. Folks are rightly scared of their supervisor. And like you said, for an agency like NASA, where 80% of the budget is eaten up by contractors, being able to have the freedom to say to your supervisor, I think maybe some of these funds are being misused, or maybe there's some waste, fraud, or abuse happening in this program, and not fearing repercussions is something that's really, really incredibly important, and something that it's really difficult to get without unionization. And so that's why, rocket scientists at NASA in Huntsville and all across the country have decided to unionize in large part with IFPTE. And so that's I really appreciate y'all taking the time to talk to us about that. And we wanted to talk about some of the concerns that people have, that people inside the agency have about the preservation of the agency's mission, right? And you would think there's a way that a robust NASA could fit into like a Make America Great Again Trump agenda of a vibrant and aspirational USA. A lot of times the callbacks in the Make America Great Again stuff is back to like the 60s, where we were putting people on the moon with NASA, and it takes a lot of money to do that. And so, before we talk about what Trump is doing, which is not that, unfortunately, what could a more vibrant and aspirational agenda of investing deeply in our scientific research into space exploration look like?
I could answer that question, but I'm going to defer to my colleague Faraz here. So go ahead and take that one.
Yeah. So Jacob, I just want to respond. First of all, you're absolutely right here. NASA is an unmistakable American icon, and it's not just Americans that recognize that, but people the world over really do get the record of accomplishment, but also just on a day-to-day basis, you run into people certainly in Washington D.C. coming out of the Air and Space Museum, or at the airport, you see people wearing NASA branded shirts and hoodies. It is a core part of America's history of scientific leadership. We see this as a critical moment right now, where the United States is now competing with other nations in a race to return humans to the moon, and instead of seeing just a very clear message that America's scientific leadership, America's technological leadership, and our record that we have of human space exploration will be invested in. We're seeing just a really deeply narrow vision of what NASA ought to be, and it's basically really just an impossible vision of NASA being able to be successful in any way. So just we'll get into this here, but right now we're looking at a NASA workforce that's already been slashed by about 22% of the workforce that we had at the start of the year, and that's been these are my words, not our members, but when they tell me how they've made the decision to leave NASA, it sounds like they've been bullied to leave NASA. They've taken, we've had a tremendous number of our membership take the deferred resignation offers, but also a lot of their bosses, a lot of the leadership of NASA, the higher level management types have walked out the door. That's experience and expertise you really need in this moment. If you want NASA to really sort of continue its mission, to expand its mission, if you want to try to accelerate, America's focus to returning to the moon, but also accelerating to Mars, accelerating the human exploration of Mars, you can't do it if you're making these massive cuts to the workforce, and then the consistent message we keep getting is that there will be a massive cut to the budget. And right now, Congress has not approved any cuts to NASA's budget. But that's the message that our members are getting. That's the message NASA workers are getting. That's also the message that NASA contractors are getting. So I think there's actually quite a large community that's on the same page here. That what's happening at NASA is just a self-inflicted wound here. So it's deeply troubling, and it's it's a bad choice that the administration is making, and ultimately um, it it hurts. Even the Trump administration's goals of just focusing on returning to the moon and going to Mars with American astronauts.
Absolutely. We're talking now to Faraz Khan, Legislative Director of IFPTE, and Matt Biggs, International President of IFPTE. IFPTE is the largest union at NASA, representing some 8,000 workers there. And so let's talk about then let's talk about that then. What has the Trump administration's stance been like towards NASA? What are the things that have been pushing people out of the door, making people feel like they're not welcome, making people feel like, the agency is not going to be the same now and into the future as it has been? And I guess we can go to you for that, President Biggs.
Yeah, well, it started even before January 20th when President Trump assumed office again, unfortunately. He has an OMB director that actually said out of the Heritage Foundation, that was the architect of that project 2025, by the way. He actually said that he wanted federal employees to wake up every day and be traumatized at the idea of going to work. That's the entire federal workforce. And NASA picked up that ball and ran with it. And like Faraz said, these workers, these brilliant scientists and engineers, have been literally bullied to leave the space agency, and it's thousands of workers that have left. These are brilliant scientists, brilliant engineers, human factors people. I mean, you can't go to the moon and Mars without doing the human factors work first, for example. And they're showing them the door as if they're meaningless. These are workers that have been around for decades at NASA. Some of them are world-renowned scientists, top of their field, that have been shown the door. It's really terrible. It sends a chill message across the workforce, and it's really damaging to the agency. Obviously, I mean that's obvious, right? But it's to a point where you wonder, can NASA ever recover from something like this? And like Faraz said, the president, his budget proposal for fiscal year 2026 for NASA, huge, steep cuts to NASA. I mean, 25%, almost a 25% across the board cut to the NASA budget. The science budget, 47% cut to the science budget. Huge cuts to aeronautics. You're not going to the moon and Mars without doing the science work first. And they seem to they have a short-sighted approach to it. There's no way this is going to happen with these kinds of cuts. Fortunately, I will say Congress, we don't have Senator Mikulski and Senator Shelby around anymore to save NASA, right? They used to work together to fund NASA properly. And I'll say across administrations, NASA has not been properly funded, but this takes it to a new level. But fortunately, appropriators, at least in the Senate side, normally this would be bad, but at least in the Senate side, they seem to want to fund NASA at the FY25 levels and reject the Trump approach. So normally that would be bad, but under the circumstances, I think we'll take that. But yeah, if Congress does not step in, and they haven't shown a willingness to take on this president, but if this Republican-led Congress does not step in and appropriate the money for NASA, it's going to get to a point where it's going to be irreversible, I fear.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
And I do hope that they do step up, and we're maybe starting to see some signs of some willingness to do that. We just saw last week that the Senate Appropriations Committee actually voted to restore millions of dollars in funding that DOGE had taken away from the CDC and NIOSH. And so hopefully, that continues. AFGE applauded that move, but, made sure to mention that, the budget process is far from over. And so even though, we're seeing maybe the Senate reject some of these DOGE cuts at the CDC and NIOSH and NASA, it still has to pass the full Senate. It still has to pass the House. And so we're a long way off from that. But hopefully those trends sort of continue because it's going to be very bad if Congress does accept the the Trump budget cuts to CDC, NIOSH, and NASA. And like you said, it'd be difficult. Just flat funding, it would already be difficult because NASA, like so many other federal agencies, is contra the public narrative, is actually underfunded. We need much more robust public sector agencies, and they need more funding than they have right now. But flat funding would be better than 25 and 47% cuts. And so, but even if we get the budget, Trump is still, firing people left and right. He's still implementing all of these changes that are making the agencies less effective. Can you talk about those sort of interactions, kind of on the ground or from administrators and supervisors? Like, how is NASA dealing with its unions at this point, outside of kind of the larger budget conversations?
Go ahead, Faraz. Yep.
Yeah. So I think it's important to understand that coming into this administration for the last 13 years, NASA had been ranked as the best place to work amongst the large federal agencies by the Partnership for Public Service. That's because there was a high level of employee commitment and engagement. As Matt mentioned, across different administrations, we've had working relationships. Our locals have had good working relationships with NASA leadership. That all changed at the start of the Trump administration. It's been, and certainly the proof of that is the fact that we've had 4,000 people at NASA, over 4,000 people take the deferred resignation offers, right? There's been a shattering of the trust, and a big part of that, along with the president's budget request, is the fact that we haven't really had anything that looks like leadership at NASA. We've had an interim NASA administrator, Janet Petro, who's no longer there. We had a nominee for NASA administrator who is going to get a vote in the Senate. I think it was in early June or might have been late May. And then just before he was going to be likely to be confirmed to be the NASA administrator, the White House yanked his nomination. And so now we're left with an interim administrator who also happens to be the Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy. There's just a massive vacuum of leadership at NASA at the agency level, and where there's a vacuum of leadership, there's also a vacuum of accountability, right? So we can't get a clear explanation of who's running the show, who's calling the shots, and where a lot of these decisions are coming from. A big part of that being ranked the best place to work is the fact that the unions at NASA, our locals, have been really effective at making sure they talk to management and they make management understand that as frontline workers, they have a perspective and they have knowledge of how the work is done and how the work ought to be done. So our members can be successful and NASA can be successful. That's all been eroded. And in that place, we don't really have a clear sense of who's running the show, who's making these decisions. We try as much as we can to maintain those relationships with the various centers and facilities with NASA management. But again, it is a directionless agency at this point. And when you don't have a direction, you don't have strong leadership. The real fear is that it's going to be the Trump administration. It's going to be OMB Director Russ Vought that's calling the shots, and don't have any sense or any understanding of what they're doing, or if they do have a sense or understanding of it, they don't appreciate the destruction they're causing right now and intend to cause coming up here in the months ahead.
Right now, I think Sean Duffy is acting administrator of NASA, and his nomination to the Department of Transportation was met with sort of cautious optimism and endorsements from some unions, including the AFA. I think the AFA endorsed Sean Duffy, his nomination. But you're saying that so far IFPTE hasn't been able to build a relationship with Duffy yet.
I think there's just a lack of focus on NASA right now, right? And you know, to be clear, like we do want there to be confirmed leadership at NASA, but we want it to be confirmed leadership at NASA that understands you can't, you know, just as Matt said, you can't go to the moon, you can't go to Mars without science.
Right.
There's you can't without the fundamental research to guide the work that NASA does on the human space exploration side. There's also really no purpose to doing it. Like, you know, what is NASA going to do with the results of these missions if you don't actually have robust funding for science, right? That's sort of, you know, that's how NASA is integrated together, and that's what's made it so successful. So it's a really unfortunate situation where without clear guidance, without clear leadership, and somebody that's really focused on NASA, especially at this moment where we've had this massive gutting of the skills and expertise of the NASA workforce already. It's a moment where we need to start, you know, really like stop the bleeding here and start to repair what's already been done.
Right. And so President Big, go ahead.
I should note, we've tried countless times to meet with Petro when she was there and Duffy, and you know, we've been met with excuse after excuse after excuse why they can't meet with us. We actually had a meeting scheduled, I think, at one point, didn't we, for Oz, and they backed out of it. So they don't have much interest in meeting with their unions, unfortunately, at least at the very top level of NASA.
That's unfortunate. And it is worth noting that, you know, we were talking earlier in the program, the Trump administration has ripped up union contracts with the VA, the EPA, with FEMA, and so far, NASA has been exempt from that. NASA was not called out in that executive order from back in April or whenever it was. And so the collective bargaining agreements between NASA and its unions, like IFPTE, are still in effect. The Trump administration has not even attempted to roll those back at this time. And so it's worth people, you know, it's worth NASA employees knowing that all of those rights are still kind of in play in a more real way than they are at other agencies. And so, you know, President Biggs, I'm interested in how IFPTE is thinking about this and responding to all of these threats, to the potential budget cuts, to to attempts to make NASA a worse place to work. You know, like what is IFPTE doing to try to fight back on all of these fronts?
Well, you know, you mentioned the elimination of union contracts and such. Yeah, NASA was not included in that executive order, fortunately. You know, we of course represent a lot of tens of thousands of DoD workers too. So you know, we were a part of a lawsuit. Actually, I think we were the lead plaintiff on a lawsuit about a month ago against that executive order. So we're working that part over there. But with NASA, I mean, it's really, like I said before, it's really critically important for Congress to step up and correct this. NASA, like Faraz said earlier, it's like the #1 brand in the world, NASA. It's so well respected. The investment the taxpayers make into NASA pays off a lot more than what we invest in NASA. I think it's $3 benefit for every $1 we invest. And you know, the benefits that everyday Americans benefit from for NASA today are immense. So Congress, in a bipartisan way, has always supported NASA, and we're hopeful that will continue even during these dire circumstances, and even with a Republican Congress that, you know, it's unprecedented. They have bent the knee to Donald Trump and given him everything he wants. We are hopeful, though, in this case, like you pointed out, the Senate appropriators, they are rejecting some of what Trump is calling for in his budget, and we are hopeful, even though it's a long process, like you point out, to get whatever we're going to get in the final funding bill. We are hopeful that Congress brings some level of accountability to this Trump administration and properly funds agencies like NASA and other science agencies for that matter.
Right. Absolutely. President Biggs, international president of the International Federation of Professional and Technical Employees. We've been talking to him, and Faraz Khan, the legislative director of IFPTE. IFPTE represents some 8,000 workers at NASA all across the country. How can listeners who work at NASA get in touch with the union and join the union and be a part of, fighting to protect not only their jobs, which is obviously going to be kind of the most direct impact. I want to protect my job. I want to make my job a good place to work, but also, preserve the mission. If you wanted to make a whole lot of money, you could work somewhere other than NASA. Presumably you have some sort of interest in the mission of NASA, and IFPTE is at the forefront of trying to protect not just the jobs of workers there, but the mission of the agency. If somebody works at NASA, how can they get in touch with IFPTE and join the union?
You can contact me directly. My email is mbiggs@ifpte.org. Our website is ifpte.org, and our telephone number is 202-239-4880. I will say, if you are in an IFPTE bargaining unit or an AFGE bargaining unit, we work hand in hand with AFGE on these issues, by the way. Great partners with IFPTE. If you're in a bargaining unit and you're not a member, sign up to be a member. That's number one. It's very easy. Just sign up, become a dues-paying member. The more members we have, the stronger we are as a union. If you are not represented, you go to ifpt.org, or you can email me directly, and we will have organizers contact you to start the organizing process. Faraz, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, and the other website we also have, if it's easier to remember, is joinifpt.org. That is our organizing website, and you can also see the types of members who we represent across the United States and Canada, the different federal agencies, but also in the private sector. And I think along with what Matt's saying, if you are in IFPT bargaining and you're not a member, yes, please join, but also be active and engaged in your union. This is the time now, I think, to really make sure we marshal our forces here, and the authentic voice of NASA employees. There's no substitute for that. And the other thing is, we're talking to members of Congress. Our members at all the different NASA centers are reaching out to their members of Congress as well, not just to support NASA's budget and reject the Trump administration's massive budget cuts, but also making sure that they ask their members of Congress to stand up and tell the administration not to enact a budget, not to do something that is wholly illegitimate and illegal, not to enact a budget ahead of what Congress has done. Even on the House side, they're rejecting the Trump administration's budget cuts. They're still cutting the NASA budget, unfortunately, on the House Republican side, but not as deeply as the Trump administration goes, because those cuts are entirely unworkable, and it's equivalent to waving a white flag if we are in fact in a space race with China.
Right. Faraz Khan, Matt Biggs, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jacob. Appreciate you having me.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.